Same as the backlog video, I learned my lesson from last year. I actually scripted out something this time, so it's less rambly. Since remakes are, well, remakes of an original work, I won't be putting one in the top spot and instead highlighting them outside of number 1, unlike what I did last year. Anyway, let's get into my rankings of the 2023 games. I trashed on Callisto Protocol's DLC plenty in my Everything Great over it, but I'm gonna say it again, it was a waste of my time and took 2 hours of Final Fantasy XVI away from me. Its inclusion was a slap in the face to someone who really wanted to like it and had high hopes considering the creative team behind it. Alice in Wonderland Puzzle Tale was a fun game. It's a small puzzle game, so there's not a lot to say about it other than I had a fun time puzzle piecing together. Power Wash Simulator is just so delightful. It's satisfying, it's fun, and it's simple. No big baddies to beat, no overarching villain, just a person in a suit and a power washer. It's so satisfying, and I highly recommend it to everyone. Eternights was interesting as a Persona Light type of game, with balancing the dating sim aspects as well as the dungeon crawling. The unfortunate downside is it felt unfinished. Like, if there was more development time it could have been much better. As it is, I had a fun time playing, and I hope the developer gets another chance down the line to make something even better. Yeah, I'm the weird one. Tears of the Kingdom is a fantastic game, don't get me wrong, but as a longtime fan of The Legend of Zelda, it just doesn't hit as well as some of the other games do. I'm still not a fan of the finding memories to flesh out the story, and the openness and vagueness of the objectives are not jiving with me. On the plus side though, the dungeons were super fun this time around, and the boss of the Wind Temple is one of my favorites of the whole series. And don't even get me started on the building mechanic. I easily lost like 15 to 20 hours in it alone. Even when it's not practical, it's hilarious attaching a mushroom to a stick and whacking things with it. Relics of the Old Faith expanded on the main game wonderfully, with you having to refight the bishops again, but this time you could actually recruit them to your cult. The new stuff they added to the skill tree and village micromanaging was fun, even if it was pretty buggy at points. Forspoken was a legitimately fun game, and I despise that everything surrounding the game was the cringy dialogue when it wasn't even close to it most of the time. It was super fun magic parkour game, and quite honestly I had a bunch of fun with it. The gameplay is fun, and towards the end you get access to 4 different magic trees that play wildly unique from each other. I'm hoping we can see more games with a focus on magic. And to tack on to that, In Tonto We Trust was also a fun bit of a DLC for the game, and my only real gripe with it is it sets up more of the world, but I don't think we're going to see more of it sadly, due to the closure of Luminous Studios. Do I need to say more? It's a Final Fantasy rhythm game! Having it come out on modern consoles means we get updates on songs too, as some Final Fantasy XVI songs got released on it once the game came out. Plus, there's other Square Enix games that get a spotlight of sorts and get tracks from them put in. It wins Cozy Game of the Year from me, that's for sure. As of writing this, I haven't finished Persona 5 Tactica, but I've played enough to say that I love it. Even though I'm not the greatest at tactic games, I love them a bunch and this is no exception. The chibi style was odd at first, especially since they weren't pulled into a storybook or anything, but it grew on me pretty quick. Especially Ann, her little chibi avatar is just adorable. So is Haru. So is everybody's, to be honest. I do wish the different elements played a bigger role, such as summoners being weak to only certain attacks, and the persona equipping doesn't do a lot from what I can tell, outside of upping your stats, but it's solid all around. And I can't wait to see the conclusion of the story, as well as play the Paint Your Heart DLC. Jedi Survivor was an excellent sequel to Fallen Order. Aside from some technical issues, it was a blast to play through and just fun to explore around and see what cosmetics you can find for Cal. The story was excellent, even if I do think Fallen Order was put together a bit better. All in all, it's a fine game, and I'm excited to see what happens next. Dead Space Remake is the remake for me. It faithfully recreates the original game while adding in extra content we didn't have before, and it was such a blast to play. It's one of the few games in recent memories to truly make me giddy. Part of me hopes they're going to remake 2 and 3 and potentially give us a proper conclusion to the series, but only time can tell. Speaking of remakes that are really good, Resident Evil 4 Remake was phenomenal, just as good as the Dead Space remake. Resident Evil 4 Remake does get higher marks because while Dead Space mostly kept things the same with a new coat of paint, Resident Evil 4 Remake felt like an entirely new experience. All of the fantastic overhauls from the later Resident Evil games meshes with the setting of 4, and I'm thoroughly excited to see what happens next. It was great, just so great. I should make a video over it, which I will eventually. Anyway, it was super fun. Funny story is I ended up playing a harder difficulty because I wasn't paying attention to the names, only the descriptions, and I picked hardcore because it said for people who played the original, and it ended up being more fun than it probably should have been. Sure, it was hard and frustrating, but the challenge made me appreciate it much, much more. Separate Ways was a fun DLC edition, filling in some of the blanks from the vanilla campaign. Ada's zipline gun was really fun to use, especially when you unlock the ability to pull shields off of enemies, and can generally use it more than the original Resident Evil 4. Some of the stuff added in was more fan service than needed, but it was really cool to see the cut content make a return. Bayonetta Origins was so much fun. I half expected the game to not have much heart when it came to telling a new tale with a different gameplay system and telling an origin story, but it certainly wowed me. I'm happy it was handled with such care, and I think I'd even like to see more entries similar to this style in the future. Spider-Man 2 improved just about every aspect over the first, and I had a blast with all the new ways to traverse New York. I liked how Venom was handled as well. Being attached to Harry made it much more emotional story, and that stuff always hits me hard. Always. I will say I wasn't a huge fan of the suit choices, with a good chunk of them being reused from the first game and most of the movie suits. Outside of that and how the map was handled, I have no real complaints and look forward to Insomniac's next outing with Spider-Man. Valhalla is legitimately one of the best DLC I've ever played, and it was free, which is completely wild with how quality the game is. It adds a roguelike element to the gameplay, which adds a fun loop going through Valhalla, and it's all about Kratos coming to terms with what he's done in the past and moving forward. Even if the original creator doesn't care for it, I love how we've gotten a more mature and wizened Kratos. If this doesn't set up a future game, I love how much of a bookend this is for the Spartan warlord turned god of war. And my top game of the year this year is Final Fantasy XVI. I'm going to talk about the DLC first, since I feel like the main campaign was better entirely, just to throw that out there as no confusion. Echoes of the Fallen was a decent enough DLC to Final Fantasy XVI. It's a fun side adventure set before the climax of the game, and I do mean like right before. While it was a tad disappointing as I wanted to see what happened after the climax of the campaign, I had fun with it and loved the inclusion of a final boss being a Final Fantasy mainstay. So as I said, Final Fantasy XVI is my game of the year. I love the story of Clive through the years, which is not seen too often in games. The land, while confusing at first, grew on me quickly. The combat, being more action and fast-paced than previous titles, bothered me none, and quite frankly, it was supremely fun, especially once the skill tree was expanded. It had an emotional climax that left me utterly destroyed, and I am hoping to see more of it. Which, I did write that earlier, before the DLC was announced, but I am hoping that the Rising Tide will show us more after the story, maybe, but there's no telling. And we have also since found out that they are, once the Rising Tide comes out, they are done with 16 and they're going to move on. So, that last little bit was dashed, but I'm still looking forward to seeing what happens with the quote-unquote conclusion of Final Fantasy XVI. Thank you all for watching my Game of the Year rankings. Now, granted, they're not super serious or anything, or, I've got my own opinions, but I do appreciate you all coming to watch it. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful new year. Try not to die out there.